Have you ever heard of free cars for disabled people provided by the government? In the Soviet Union, this was a reality. After World War II, the USSR faced a difficult challenge: how to help hundreds of thousands of veterans who returned with serious injuries. The answer turned out to be unexpected: three-wheeled minicars, which the government provided to disabled people for free use. At first glance, strange, noisy, and uncomfortable, but for their owners, they were a ticket to a normal life. Today, I'll tell you the almost forgotten story of the Soviet microcars, built specifically for people with disabilities. Cars you've probably never seen, but which changed the lives of thousands of people. The first attempts to create a special vehicle for people with disabilities in the USSR began almost immediately after the end of World War II. The Kiev motorcycle plant developed and launched the production of a model called the K1V. It was a three-wheeled motorcycle with fully manual controls. Instead of an electric starter, the engine was started by turning a hand crank, similar to an old meat grinder. Instead of a steering wheel, there was a long, spring-loaded lever that controlled all the functions. There was no roof, not even a canvas top. For war veterans who had sacrificed their health fighting the Nazis, this contraption caused mixed feelings. On one hand, it was good to be remembered. On the other, was this really all they deserved? Apparently, the government understood this sentiment, and by the late 1940s, they began developing a fundamentally new type of mobility vehicle, aiming to provide at least basic comfort. In 1952, a prototype was presented, and in 1953, mass production began. It was still a three-wheeled vehicle, no longer an open cart with no roof, but not yet a full-fledged car either. It occupied a unique niche, somewhere between motorcycle and automobile. Its name was simple: S1L. But among the public, it quickly earned a nickname: invalidka. At the rear of its heated metal body was a one-cylinder, two-stroke 123 cubic centimeter engine producing 4 horsepower, started with a kickstarter. The vehicle featured a 3-speed gearbox, basic motorcycle-style steering, rear drum brakes, chain drive, and independent spring suspension. It weighed just 275 kilograms, 606 pounds, and had a top speed of about 30 kilometers per hour, 18 miles per hour. In 1956, the upgraded S3L model received a more powerful 346 cubic centimeter motorcycle engine, producing 8 horsepower, nearly doubling the top speed. Production was moved to the Serpukhov motorcycle plant, which during the 1940s had repaired, captured German motorcycles, and assembled Indian and Harley-Davidson bikes from U.S. Lend-Lease kits. From 1944 to 1946, the plant also manufactured spare parts for Soviet AM-600 motorcycles. The design itself wasn't unique. Similar three-wheeled microcars were being developed in other parts of the world during the same period. But the key difference was this: in the USSR, these vehicles were provided free of charge to people with disabilities as part of the state's social welfare program. Disabled individuals, officially recognized by a medical commission, could receive one through the Department of Social Security after completing the necessary paperwork. And it wasn't a one-time deal. The vehicle was not given for life. This wasn't a scam, but a regulated state process. Old mobility vehicles were returned to the authorities once worn out, and the recipient would be issued a new one. The whole process was official and monitored by the state. Yes, some people tried to speed up this cycle by reporting breakdowns to get newer models, but that was more the exception than the rule. From 1953 to 1957, A total of 30,978 mobility tricycles were produced. Interestingly, the invalidka did not follow the fate of many Soviet cars, which were produced for decades without any changes. In 1957, just 4 years after its debut, the S1L was significantly updated. At first, the Serpukhov factory carried out the development on its own. Later, engineers from the NAMI Institute, the Soviet government's automotive research center, joined the process, and in the same year, a new model was introduced, the S3A. The first thing you notice is the four wheels instead of the previous three, along with two headlights instead of one. Inside the cabin, the motorcycle-style handlebar was replaced with a proper steering wheel. In other words, the invalidka now looked even more like a real car. There were also several technical improvements: a 4-speed manual transmission, an electric starter, a rack and pinion steering system, an independent front suspension with torsion bars. The top speed remained unchanged at 60 kilometers per hour, and the curb weight increased to 425 kilograms. Unlike the earlier versions, this generation of invalidka became widely recognized by the Soviet public. It even appeared in one of the most beloved Soviet comedies, Operation Y. Thanks to actor Yevgeny Morgunov, who played the driver of the vehicle in the film, the car earned a new nickname, Morgunovka.
Где этот чертов инвалид?
Не шуми, я инвалид.
Interestingly, the Morgunovka was adapted for different types of disabilities. There were versions for people with one leg, for those without both legs, and even for those with only one arm. The controls in these cars looked like something out of a tinkerer's garage. Everything was modified with levers and handles that could be operated with an elbow or even a shoulder. Just like its predecessor, the car wasn't given out as private property. It was issued for free temporary use, and once it wore out, it had to be returned to social services. On paper, it was a sign of state care. In practice, it depended heavily on the medical commission and your local officials. Sometimes you'd wait months, other times just a week. Comfort? They tried. At one point, engineers in Serpukhov experimented with replacing the fabric roof with a fiberglass one. Better insulation, less leaking. But it never made it to production. Same with an attempt to turn the Morgunovka into a mini cargo hauler. A clever idea, but again, not approved. Still, despite its simplicity and outdated design, the S3A remained a key part of the system. It was produced with only minor changes all the way until 1970. In total, 203,291 units were made, each one tailored to fit the needs of a specific person. The effort to create a successor to the S3A motorized wheelchair began almost immediately after its launch in 1958. But progress was slow. The Serpukhov factory lacked the equipment needed for stamping complex all-metal body panels. Only by 1964 did a real opportunity arise to modernize production. Initially, designers envisioned a lightweight utility vehicle for rural use, with a pickup body and off-road capabilities. But that idea was scrapped in favor of a more conventional layout. However, many of the original concepts made their way into the development of a new model. The first prototype was unveiled in 1968. For the Serpukhov factory, the S3D was a breakthrough. It had a fully enclosed metal body with a solid roof. Visually, it looked much more like a real car, albeit a very small one. It was under 3 meters long, but weighed nearly 500 kilograms. With only 12 horsepower, its performance was underwhelming. As with earlier models, The S3D was distributed free of charge to disabled people. After 2.5 years of use, the owner received a free overhaul. After another 2.5 years, the vehicle had to be returned and replaced with a new one. A special motorcycle driver's license with a medical mark was required. Training was organized by the Social Services Department. The factory steadily produced motorized wheelchairs in unprecedented volumes, 10 to 12,000 units annually, with production peaking at 22,000 units in 1976 to 1977. However, compared to the vibrant period of the late 1950s and early 1960s, when several promising prototypes were developed each year, technical innovation at SMZ had clearly stalled. The USSR was slowly but steadily slipping into the era of stagnation. Everything that was designed by the chief designer's office during this time seemingly ended up in the drawer. At least, no records of any developments from the Serpukhov Design Bureau in those years have survived. This wasn't due to a lack of initiative from the factory engineers, but rather the result of ministry policy. Only in 1979 did the authorities give the green light to create a fundamentally new, small-class passenger car. But this time, it was not an independent development by the Serpukhov automobile plant. Only in 1979 did officials approve a new compact car project. But this time, it wasn't a solo effort by SMZ. Engineers from the Lada plant, the makers of the Lada, joined in. The new vehicle would be the smallest Lada yet, the Oka. The ministries decided this ultra-compact car could be adapted for disabled drivers and built at the Serpukhov plant. A prototype appeared in 1982, but production began only in 1988. Regular versions were made by Lada in Togliatti. Serpukhov built the disabled-only variant under the Seas brand. Production of the disabled Oka continued until 2007. After that, the Serpukhov plant switched to making regular civilian Oka models. The special disability version was quietly phased out. But what about the S3D? Even after the Oka was launched, the S3D didn't disappear. Both cars were built in parallel for years. The final 300 units of the S3D were assembled in 1997 in post-Soviet Russia. Today, the products of the Serpukhov car plant have become collectibles across the former Soviet Union. Well, except for the Oka. No one's really chasing after those unless they need parts. But the later S3D? Sellers ask anywhere from $500 to $1,000 for unrestored examples. And the Morgunovka, the older model, that's much rarer. Prices start at $2,000 and often go well over $5,000 if it has an interesting backstory. And that's before restoration. Once fully restored, the value multiplies. But the crown jewel is the first model, the three-wheeled S1L. Only about 10 are believed to survive. And if one ever comes up for sale, which is rare, the price could easily exceed $10,000. That is, if you can even find one listed. Interestingly, the Soviet program wasn't unique. In the UK, the government handed out Invacar three-wheelers to disabled people for free from 1948 until 2003. Then suddenly, they were banned from public roads by law. So in a way, the British version outlived the Soviet one. Back in Russia, the story was coming to an end. By 2005, there were no more state orders for disability vehicles. By 2007, CAZ only produced regular Okas, while the disabled version was made by custom request. at $3,500 apiece. Then came the 2008 financial crisis. The price of the disabled Oka jumped to $5,200 and demand collapsed. Production dropped below sustainable levels. And so, the long history of Serpukov's disability vehicles quietly ended. Regular Oka production limped along until 2013, and then stopped for good. Today, the former automobile plant no longer produces anything. Its buildings are now rented out as office and warehouse space. Officially, it's called an industrial park. Sounds impressive. But in reality, the factory's now just a part of history,